everyone, and welcome to our latest Norwich Talks Up Businesses. Some of you might have been here before, but this is our newest and temporary addition to the Norwich business community. So this is the Norwich Business Support Hub, which is funded by the UK government and delivered by Norwich Business Improvement District. My name's Izzy and I'm the Head of Marketing at Norwich Bid. I know some of you I know from LinkedIn only, but it's really nice to have you all here today. So Norwich Bid, just briefly, is a not-for-profit. We're funded by Norwich businesses, and out of that fund we kind of redistribute it across the city centre on initiatives designed to kind of be big improvements for Norwich. So some of these projects you might have heard of: Visit Norwich, Norwich Christmas Lights, Head on Our Home. We also sponsor festivals like the Norfolk Network Festival and the Go-Go Trails. But some things you might not have heard of, for example, the business crime radios that we kind of give out to kind of various places who need support, things like that. And one of our latest projects is this, which is called Onwards Norwich, and it's all about kind of training and upskilling businesses for free. So out of that fund which we received from the UK government, we've been able to support 900 businesses across Norwich for free, deliver free training. We're really lucky to have Claire from Mentor here today, who's been able to kind of deliver excellent business support in the city centre for people looking to kind of start their businesses here. And in the summer we're looking forward to launching our new branding campaign, Work in Norwich, which is all about bringing businesses and people into Norwich to work, which as of today was announced the best city in England to raise a family, according to comparethemarket.com. So fun for us all. I also can tell you where the toilets are. So if anyone needs the toilet, you head into the forum, double doors on your left, all the way at the back, just before the library, the toilets. And we're not planning on any fires, but if there is one, if we all just head outside and then await further instruction. So yeah, really glad to be here today with someone who I'm very much looking forward to hearing about, and an excellent champion for Norwich as well. So I'll pass over to Lucy, who can tell you a bit more about the Talks Up project.
Great, thank you ever so much, Isabel. Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Knox and I lead the Norfolk Network. It's great to see you all here today, and there's quite a lot of new faces, which is fantastic. So Norfolk Network is a business membership organisation. We bring together forward-thinking founders and directors of startups and small businesses, academics and university students, and freelancers and self-employed. And the idea is we have a common purpose. We all want to build stuff. So it's either building our businesses, building our teams, or building our businesses ourselves. We're also member-led, so that's really important, that members contribute, they get up and they talk and they share and they discuss. I think the more you are active, the more connected you can. And I think really sharing good quality and practical knowledge is just really important, which is what we do. And also peer support, very important, and also building those relevant connections. So I spend my day discovering new people and championing our members and making connections. And also creating environments like this for our members to sort of get involved. And so I was really delighted to be able to have the opportunity to work with Norwich Bid on this programme, Norwich Talks Up Business. It's keeping me incredibly busy. I'm meeting some great people and giving you an opportunity for people to sort of talk about something in 20 minutes that's really important to them and they want to share with the wider community. So it's now time. I'm delighted that Robert agreed to talk. Robert is an independent brand strategist, and he's also the Professor of Brand Leadership at UEA. He's had 30 years as a strategist at Wolf Ollins, which is a global branding agency based in London. And he's the author of The Big Idea and Branding, a Very Short Introduction. So please join me today in giving Robert a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Lucy and Izzy, for inviting me. And it's really good to see actually quite a lot of familiar faces, most of whom I have up to now only experienced in 2 dimensions. So actually to see that people are actually 3-dimensional is great. and also to be in this extraordinary space. I feel we're kind of on, public display here as well, which is fun. So I'm going to talk about ideas and about big ideas. I'm going to talk a little bit about collecting. Then I'm going to talk about things I've done through my career and some things that I've learned. And then kind of finish by bringing it all to the current day and to this city, and why this city is so important in connection with big ideas in business. So collecting. My partner Neil collects all sorts of things. He collects little ceramic sheep from the early 19th century. He's got over 100 of those. He then went on to collect little ceramic cats. He collects wooden boxes of all shapes and sizes. He's recently started collecting little pictures painted by artists from the Norwich School. And we recently moved to a new house in Holt, which has a double garage. And that's fantastic because there's actually room for this stuff. But so Neil is a great collector. And I remember a few years ago, Neil and I were having dinner in a restaurant in Stoke Newington with our friends Hans and Marina. We were talking about collecting. And Marina turned to me and asked me, so what do you collect? And I said, well, I don't really collect anything, and it's just as well because we actually would run out of space if I did. And Hans then said, but I think you collect ideas. And that had never occurred to me before. He's absolutely right. What I love, and always have, I did philosophy at university, is ideas. And I just love coming across a new word, a new phrase, a new concept, a new thought, and kind of making sense of it and sharing it with other people. And in fact, my blog on my website consists of mainly the idea of the month. There's a new idea each month. And one of the ideas I'm really interested in at the moment is a thing called the long now. Is that familiar? People come across the long now? So the long now comes from people like Brian Eno, the musician, and he says that one of the things that's wrong with the way we think is that we think now is the next 5 minutes, or at the most the next 5 years if we're doing corporate planning. But what if we thought about it as 10,000 years into the future, 10,000 years into the past? That's now. We would make very different and much better decisions. And in our new house in Holt, we're thinking, well, let's explore having solar panels. Now, in the conventional definition of now, that makes no economic sense at all. It would take years for them to pay back. But if you think about the long now, of course you would. It'd be ridiculous not to. So anyway, the long now is something I'm interested in, particularly because one of my projects at the moment is helping an organisation think about history and the past and the future and why it all matters. So I love all of this stuff. And I've been really lucky in my working life to deal with ideas. I didn't quite realise that I was going to do that. It sort of started accidentally, the way these things do, when I started working way back in 1993 for a company in King's Cross in London called Wolff Olins. And I'd known about Wolff Olins and admired Wolff Olins since I was a teenager, so it was kind of a real thrill to get a job there. But I thought I was joining a design company, and I'm interested in design, so that was great. And what Wolff Olins was known for, and still is known for, is logos, designing logos. Although one of the things I discovered straight away was that we weren't allowed to use the word logo. That wasn't a serious enough word, and we had to say corporate mark. You got into terrible trouble if you said logo. So I started working at Wolff Olins and met Wally Olins, one of the founders, and realised something that hadn't struck me before, because his belief was that behind every good piece of design and behind every good logo, there is what he calls the central idea. In other words, what is this idea? What is the idea that this piece of design is meant to express? And I began to realise that you could think of organisations and products and services not just through what they sort of literally do, but through the idea that they stand for. And that really is the essence of branding. Wolff Olins is a brand consultancy. And I think the great fascination of branding is the way that it turns perfectly ordinary product or company or service or organisation into something bigger. It adds meaning to it by defining what it is that that thing wants to stand for. And I remember one of the very first things that Wally said to me, we were working for the government of Portugal, and he didn't really know me, but he took me into a meeting room and said, Robert, I want you to create a 20-year plan for Portugal. So I was amazed that he thought I could do that, but that was the kind of, in other words, he was looking for an idea that Portugal could stand for. And where we got to actually was the idea that Portugal is where Europe meets the Atlantic, and that perhaps what Portugal could become is the world's sort of conference centre. And then there was an election in Portugal and the government changed and all that got forgotten. But it introduced me to this idea that a company, a product, even a country could stand for something, and that you could actually spend your working life helping clients work out what it is that they want to stand for. It's an absolute dream job, and I'm still doing that. Now. One of the last things I did at Wolf Aliens was with Wikipedia, where we helped them develop an idea around the idea of setting knowledge free, because we live in a world, I think, where knowledge is increasingly owned and controlled by governments and corporations and technologists. And Wikipedia is almost the last thing on the internet that isn't funded by selling your data or through advertising. It actually is a relatively independent thing. And a free thing, and it actually does set knowledge free. So I began to think more and more about this thing that companies can be ideas, and eventually wrote a book about it. Here it is, the big idea, which I think is still available as a Kindle book. This is 20 years ago I first wrote it. Did lots of interviews with CEOs to find out what they thought their company stood for, some of which were really weird. I was very keen to talk to Ingvar Kamprad, who is the IK in IKEA. He's the founder of IKEA, because that's the brand that perhaps I admire more than any other. And he said, yeah, he was prepared to do an interview, but only by fax. So I had to fax my questions, and then wait an hour or something, and the answer would come back on the fax machine. That was really weird. I also interviewed the then boss of Marks and Spencer's, and out of sort of politeness sent him afterwards what I was going to say about him, and he said, you cannot publish this. But I had every right to publish it, it's what he said, so I did publish it, but I was very surprised by his sort of his reaction to something pretty harmless, I think. Looking back at this book now, I think it's, in some ways, it's kind of a bit naive. I mean, perhaps in a nice way, a bit naive. But I think it is also, it was kind of ahead of its time. And I suppose the central thing in the book was that increasingly consumers are interested not just in value for money, but values for money. And we've seen that grow more and more in the 20 years since I wrote the book. And that companies and the people who work in companies are interested in a purpose beyond profit. And as we all know, purpose is now the biggest buzzword in business, in consulting. And I wasn't the inventor of the idea, but I think this book was one of the first to talk about it and take it really seriously. What I discovered from the interviews was that a lot of these companies had a big idea that had something in common. Not all of them, but a lot of them had a big idea that was somehow going against the grain, that was seeking to do things in a different way or a counter to what was going on in the world at the time, whether it was the Body Shop or the Guardian in those days, or even IKEA, actually. IKEA's big idea is a better everyday life for the many people. It's very strange English. A better everyday life for the many people. But that's kind of deeply held belief that good design should be available to everyone, not just really rich people. That goes right back to when IKEA started in the late 1940s. So this idea of going against the grain, I thought was very interesting. Fast forward another 10 years, and I became increasingly frustrated because it was really hard for us to hire good brand strategists in Wolf Aliens. There's no good professional education in branding. So I had the idea of creating a university course, and I took the idea to quite a few business schools around the country, and they sort of patted me on the head and said, go away and get a PhD, and then we'll talk to you. Because there can be a bit of a closed shop. I've got a couple of university friends here, so forgive me. Universities can be a bit of a closed shop. Then I came to UEA through an amazing woman called Nicola Johnson, who I actually had tea with on Saturday, still in touch with, who ran the Sainsbury Centre at UEA. She introduced me to all the right people in UEA, and you know, UEA's motto is do different, and it's more than just a motto, it does actually happen. And the people then said, yeah, this is very unusual for a practitioner to come and design a new course, but let's do it. It's not what universities do, but let's do it, let's make it happen. Let's do different. And that's what happened, and 10 years on, the course is still running. We now have, I think, 240 graduates out in the world working for people like Google and TikTok and Yahoo and Red Bull recently, Farfetch, lots and lots of others from all over the world, going out to all over the world with, I think, a slightly, well, with some branding skills, but also, I hope, a certain attitude to branding, which is that branding is not a kind of sales gadget that's designed to trick people into buying things. It is this much more important task of helping groups of people work out what it is that they want to stand for. It is an inherently ethical procedure, branding, because it's all about what do you want to stand for, what difference do you want to make in the world, what do you want to change. People often think of branding as a subset of marketing, and I think it's the other way around. I think marketing is a subset of branding. Branding is important across everything an organisation does. So we created the brand leadership course, and it's still going strong. Just bringing everything up to date. More recently, I left Wolf Olins, just coming up for 2 years ago, and like thousands and thousands of people, I thought, why live in London when you could live in Norfolk? So we've been coming on holiday in Norfolk for years and years and years. So I decided to start as an independent brand consultant, and also to move up here and be based here, which has been a great decision. I think what's been going on is simultaneously during the pandemic, a lot of organisations around the world stopped and thought, what are we for? What are we doing? Why does this matter? There's almost kind of crisis of identity in lots and lots of businesses. So we saw a lot of big rebranding projects, and you'll have seen new logos emerge for everybody, from a very slightly different logo for the BBC, if anyone has noticed that, to the kind of lovely new thing that Burger King have done, to many others. And I think that means that businesses and marketing departments have rediscovered the big idea, rediscovered the importance of standing for something. A lot of marketing money, as you know, in recent years has gone into little executional things, what's called performance marketing, which is really all about getting people to buy something by clicking, and that's fine, and that produces short-term sales results, but it doesn't build a long-term brand. And I think one of the things that the pandemic does, maybe the pandemic has actually made people extend their now to a slightly longer now, and think about, actually, we need to build a brand that will last into the future, and not just to sell stuff in the next quarter. So that's encouraging, I think. There was something I saw on my phone on the way in this morning from one of those email newsletters that you have somehow accidentally subscribed to. I don't remember subscribing to this or wanting to particularly, but it's called Rosie and Faris, and here it says, and this is a bit kind of, it's kind of hit me this morning. Here it says, "What's the big idea?" And there's a piece by someone called Alex Murrell about big ideas. And the piece is okay, but it's limited. It's only about big ideas in advertising. So people in advertising use the phrase a lot, and what they mean is a campaign idea. And I think that's fine, important, but a much smaller thing than a big idea for an organisation as a whole. It's not really about what do we want to stand for, it's about how do we create communication that's consistent and coherent over a period of time. So anyway, I think the biggest sense of the big idea is returning. And the thing that has really struck me being in Norwich, or being near Norwich, is what a kind of hotspot for brands and branding this city is, unusually for a city this size. When you think of brands that go right back 250 years, Norwich Union, Aviva. I did work on the change from Norwich Union to Aviva, so don't shoot me, I was part of that. But Norwich Union, Start Right shoes, Gerald, all way back in the 18th century. Coleman's, so I think Coleman's is a really very interesting story. Jeremiah Coleman kind of invented product branding as we know it. I don't think he ever would have used the word. But in 1855, he had the idea that rather than sending out anonymous brown boxes of mustard, they would be printed in yellow with a logo and a name on it, and they would build a brand. And they would advertise to build the brand, and they would do posters. And not only that, they would even things like the trucks of coal, bringing coal into the Coleman's factory, would be painted coal for the Coleman's factory. Kind of an amazing sense of what you could do by expressing what you're all about. But what's more interesting, and almost more interesting, is that a couple of years later, he opened the very first school factory. So he opened a school for the children of the people working there. Because this is a business with values. It is an example of a business with a purpose beyond, or was a purpose beyond, profit. And by the way, I know it's not made here anymore, but Unilever, now the makers of Coleman, is still a business that runs on purpose and takes it very seriously. Lotus Cars, I really love the big idea behind Lotus Cars, I'm sure you know, which is simplify and then add lightness. This is Colin Chapman's idea about Lotus Cars. You would add lightness to them, and that's still, even their amazing new SUV, which is incredibly heavy car because it's got these batteries in it, they still think about lightness, not physical lightness, but lightness in terms of what it feels like to drive, the lightness of the whole user experience. So that idea goes back a long way, still works as a big idea driving a business. So Norwich, I think, a very interesting hotspot for all of this. Why? I think because actually, if you think about brands and big ideas, the best ones being somehow against the grain, that is Norwich. Norwich is against the grain. Norwich is a place of independent thinking. It's not on the way to anywhere. It doesn't have to conform to anything else. It can be itself. It's big enough. You know, once the second biggest city in Britain, it's big enough to be itself. And to borrow the UEA motto, it's big enough to do different. And that's why we've in the last few months created another membership organisation alongside Lucy's called Brandland, which is for anybody working in and around branding, in and around Norwich. And it's great to see several people, Anna and Izzy and Bobby and others, who've been centrally involved in developing Brandland. Our definition of brand is very, very wide, so anything that's remotely related to what I've been talking about, from design to technology to strategy. And our definition of Norwich is also pretty wide. I think you can, anywhere on this planet, actually, you can join. Our URL is brandland.world, so we're not trying to be kind of narrow there. So we set that up, starting to acquire members. We're doing a big conference at UEA at the end of June, where our keynote speaker is Minnie Mole, who is the chief executive of the Design Council in London. And we've got people from Startright and from Hokum Hall and lots of other places coming to talk there. So that's kind of just a mention for Brandland. What I think, just to conclude, is that actually we need now big ideas more than we ever have. I think we're lucky. My working life has been through a relatively benign period in the world's history, which has suddenly evaporated. Not suddenly, it has evaporated. We live in very troubling times, I think, and we need new ideas, new big ideas, to suggest a way forward. I think the idea of the long now actually might be one of them. And there's another really interesting, I'm very interested in the idea of citizens at the moment. There's a book about this, a theory that we used to be subjects to the king, we had to do what the king said. Then in the last 100 years we've become consumers, where we have more apparent freedom, but it's within very clear parameters set by organisations. Now we need to be citizens, where we actually are self-determining. So that idea of citizens, I think, is really interesting. But anyway, I think big ideas are more important than ever. I think Norwich is more than most the place to have those ideas, because actually, if you ask me what is the secret of success in branding, it actually is that UEA phrase, do different. It's not just looking different with a new logo, it's not just saying different with a new communication campaign, it's actually doing something different and valuable. So that's ideas and big ideas. Very happy to answer questions and perhaps explore what the next big idea should be.
Hello, I'm Phil McSweeney, and thank you, Robert. Are you a big, hairy, audacious goals fan?
Yes, this is. Does this come from good to great? Is that where
the quality?
Yes, yeah. Yes, I think to some extent I am. My worry about big, hairy, audacious. Well, I've got two worries about it. One is I think it is an extremely masculine way of looking at the world, which feels a bit old-fashioned now. But the other is that it could be seen as a very self-serving way of looking at the world. What are the big goals we've got for our own company? And I think one of the good things that has happened in business over the last 20 years is a little bit of a move away from that sort of mission thinking. What is our mission? My favourite mission statement was the Japanese tractor company, Komatsu, whose big competitor was the American company, Caterpillar, and their mission statement was kill Caterpillar. So that's kind of mission, and I think big, hairy, audacious goals can be sort of missiony. And purpose, although I think the whole purpose thing can be overblown and overused, is a little bit more about what difference do we want to make for everybody else out in the world, rather than just for ourselves. So I'm not against it. I would just have those two questions, I think. But it's a great book. It still is a very good book. Good to great.
What's your book?
Hi, I'm Michelle.
Michelle.
In terms of the big idea, how long? Is it a lifetime? How long does it last for? Is it something that brands have to readjust and think about time and time again, or is it for life?
I think it's a relatively long-term thing. There's no kind of rule for that. But so a communication message, a slogan, might last for a few years, but a kind of deeper sense of purpose, I think, should last longer than that. And by the way, this book, The Big Idea, this was the working title for this book. I never meant it to be the real title. But you know what it's like. You have a working title, then you can't think of anything better. So this ends up. I think what's interesting about all the most interesting organisations is not that they just have a big idea, but that they have a big spirit. It's more than just an intellectual idea, and there was a spirit behind Coleman's, which lasted a long time, probably nearly 200 years. There is definitely a spirit behind IKEA, which has lasted for, 70, 80 years, nearly 70 years certainly. So it can be a long-term thing, and one of the reasons I really love working in and do in branding rather than advertising is that the time span is longer. That makes us much less practical and realistic and more idealistic and naive, I think, often. But it is a longer time scale, and I think that's what I enjoy.
Yeah, it just for the back of Michelle's question, actually, have you ever thought of going back to the big idea and actually re-interviewing the current CEOs of some of those organisations to see whether the big ideas, how they change maybe?
That's a good idea. That's a really
You
good
just,
idea.
yes, you have just, it had never occurred to me, but yeah, what a great idea. And I think Marks and Spencer's would be a very interesting example, because I think Marks and Spencer's is very lucky to have survived, really, because I don't know what they stand for. They used to be, when I was small, they were the kind of the home of respectability, weren't they? And similarly with Boots, Boots was the retailer you could always trust. And those things have evaporated. I don't think it's an accident that John Lewis has survived and Debenhams hasn't, because John Lewis has only just survived as well, but John Lewis has always stood for something, and Debenhams not. And the John Lewis one is another example going, that's 100 years, I think, in 2 years' time. John Speed and Lewis, this idea of giving his family company to the employees, because he was actually worried that the Russian Revolution would happen in Britain, and that the way to resolve that was to make the interests of the owners and the interests of the workers exactly the same thing. So that whole kind of non-adversarial way of doing business, and you know still as a customer, if you take something back to John Lewis, then they'll fix it for you, they won't argue with you. That non-adversarial thing goes right back to there. So yes, thank you very much, I'll do that.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you've obviously spoke about the big idea in terms of these big brands. Have you ever applied it to, and is it relevant to personal brands as well?
It's totally relevant to, it's totally relevant to small brands. And another thing which I forgot to mention about around here is that there are so many really, really good small brands that really do stand for something. An awful lot of them seem to begin with the letter S. I don't know why. There's a cosmetics brand called Sop, which is really lovely. There's a company that makes knobs for kitchens called Swarf. Fantastic word, Swarf. There's this new fintech thing called Snoop. Come across that, which is winning lots of awards, which kind of brings all of your financial information together and shows you how you can get a better deal. That's going to be a really big thing, I think, Snoop. And there's something called Squish, which is created by a couple of my ex-students, which is shampoo but without any plastic packaging. The packaging probably going to be made out of seaweed instead. And what's interesting there is that they had the brand before they had the product, really, so it's kind of around. Can you apply it to personal branding? I think you can, and I'm going to be teaching that to my students on Thursday. Actually, we have a day called Brand Me on Thursday's one of my students at the back there. So Victoria, so we're going to be doing that on Thursday, and I think the answer is yes, but with care, because human beings are not really the same thing as corporations, and it's a trickier and more sensitive thing to do. But I think to some extent, yes, you can work out what it is that you stand for, and that can be very useful. Yeah.
Okay.
Mary Jo, would you like to?
Yeah. I just wondered if there are any particular values that you think societally that we have lost in the last 10 to 15 years.
I worry that we are in danger of losing tolerance, which for me is one of the most important of all values, and I think we're becoming, although in lots of ways, of course, it is much easier to belong to a minority of one kind or another now than it was when I was growing up. I think that's still very fragile, and I think there's a lot of people who would rather fight, literally or metaphorically, than talk. So that would be one for me. I'm sure there's others as well. People will have other views about values that are missing.
Thanks. And it's interesting you're saying in terms of Norwich's role and the role of brands as well. What would you say to businesses or new brands to come, emerging brands? Like, what is the opportunity here in Norwich or anywhere else?
I think the opportunity is to identify something that is wrong with the world in a big way or a small way. Whether it's intolerance or plastic shampoo bottles, and do something about that using the amazing technical and creative resources that exist in the city, and use the kind of magic sauce of Norwich, which I think is this sort of going against the grain thing, but telling the story in the way that Coleman's did. Coal for the Coleman's factory. Telling the story in the biggest possible way. Or, Starflight shoes, another great example. Everybody knows the image of the children walking away down that straight road. Kind of creating an image that powerful for something that's only a pair of shoes. Of course, people do it in other cities, but I think there's something that makes it come naturally here.
Stop it there, actually, Robert. Thank you so much.